I always feel like that's one of the big attractions to the work, is that you want to get up next to it and you want to feel its life, you want to sort of be drawn into it. You're interested in how it can have a kind of vivid integrity on a par with your own. So that skin and that surface seems to be, to me, it's always been very important. It kind of draws you into it, and I think that tactile thing, I think, is the way of sort of connecting to the work in a very direct way. And it also immediately, you kind of want to compare it to yourself, which just puts immediately this kind of tension between its sort of materiality and your materiality. I also started to see the implications for water having a variety of different associations, from sort of obviously bodily fluids, but also to marking time and to the sort of entropic associations water have, that is erosion and corrosion. In an early work that I did called Major Joints, Hangers, and Squat, there was an element in it called low cone, which is a little flat, low aspect cone that hung just above the floor. Low cone in some ways had no association to the body, except that it put a little tension on your standing on the floor, because when you first saw it, it looked like it was sitting square and hard and fast on the floor, but you began to realize it was actually in motion because it wasn't touching the floor. So it's a bit like the effect of being on a train in a train station with another train next to you. Perhaps you're moving, they're moving, one starts to take off from the train station, one's coming in, but there's a very strange sensation at first where you're not sure which train is actually moving. Or am I moving, or is it moving? In 1998, I did 60 Slippers, which was 60 of these. And I had called them slippers early on, some other individual variants I made, partly because of this analogy of being, to your feet, and the sort of lightness of being in slippers, but also the idea of something sort of slipping along. In the same way that you have this differentiation in, say, major joints, hangers, and squat between the femur bones and low cone, representing two very different, one completely emptied of topical value and only conditional, nearly, with the exception of sort of a little bit of the illustration, if you will, of something being pulled up from the ground, therefore a kind of cone. So there's a little illustration in that. But relatively, the cartoon value, if you will, is very, very low relative to something else that's just verbatim right out of your body. I mean, cast bones from your thigh bones. Or this sort of dichotomy, if you will, between that sort of Cartesian corner, the sort of objectified Cartesian corner, and the skeleton as being ultimately graphic and verbatim. And similarly, I was thinking about Chartres Cathedral and the snake in the bed of being that kind of range from the sort of most primal kind of life, which is a snake, which is like our own alimentary canal is a snake. We're a mouth, a digestion, and an anus. And that's the most fundamental and the lowest form of life. No legs, no arms, you don't have a face. You're just a mouth that takes something in, works it over, and comes out and is transformed. So that was sort of my fascination with the idea of that being, in a way, the low form. And then the high, most elaborated and the most idealized form, of course, would be Chartres. And in between is the bed, which is this sort of real-time, actual scale, what we sit in and sleep in. And I suppose has its sort of reference to dream and, the sort of floating bed. But I think of it also as a kind of corpse, that's why there's a femur bone tied to one of the legs, that it was a way of kind of thinking about the bed being kind of flesh and the frame of the bed being bones. So the reversal of Chartres Cathedral from this sort of high, transcendent, spiritual, immaterial thing into like the teats on a cow, you know, dripping water off of its spires, and hanging and pulling and distending and, you know, in great tension by its weight, oppositely of its otherwise upright status, was just the game. I'd made these two kind of like old shoes, you know, somebody described them as like an old couple. I had the idea of putting them in a very small room, a bit like, which I've never actually in fact seen, but I've seen sort of variants of it in Japan, of the Indian, I'm not sure my pronunciation is going to be quite right, but Chaicha caves, which were these Buddhist caves with a stupa carved in the live rock, and normally it'd be a rather small vaulted space, carved directly in the stone, and then the stupa would actually be also revealed out of the stone, and the stupa being, of course, this sort of historical burial mound for Buddha and Hindu kings before. And, but you definitely had this kind of quality of a kind of, which is common in my work, of being interested in this sort of ship in the bottle, you know, of having an object, again, which is, you know, on the threshold between being object and being, I know it sounds strange to call something that's an object spatial, but that your experience of the object is spatial. And the clearest example of that would be our experience largely of architecture, which is that obviously you can stand back and objectify it, but largely we deal with architecture as something that, if not looming, is something that's incomprehensible in one point of view, particularly after you've penetrated it and after you've moved through it. Then it becomes really a series of impressions that one has to hold together and experience and has to sort of develop over time. I think it's the inside-outside experience. It's also the fact that it's not objectifiable. So, you know, and I think also what's interested me about it, particularly in sculpture, is that it kind of breaks down the clarity of your being the subject and it being the object.